The Tata Steel Masters 2026 is now over. We need to see what happened in the crucial final round, round 13. So first of all, the standings going into the final round. Out ahead, Nodirbek Andusattorov with 8, a half a point ahead of Jawakhir Sindarov with 7.5. Then 3 players on 7, Niemann, Keimer and Van Foreest. Okay, let's have a look at the last round pairings. That was crucial. So Andusattorov playing black against Erigaisi. Now Erigaisi was having a pretty rough tournament, playing quite recklessly sometimes. So that could be an interesting pairing for Andusattorov, but well, we'll see. And then Sindarov had black against Taidai Van Nguyen, who's having a miserable tournament. He's right at the back. And then the others, in fact, Van Foreest, Keimer and Niemann all had black, which is quite strange. But the pressure was on Nodirbek Andusattorov. In 2023, he was leading going into the final round and lost. In 2024, he had a tie-break. He was first, equal, had a tie-break, but got knocked out. And last year, 2025, he came third, just a half a point behind the winners. So, could he get over the line this year? The pressure was on him. In fact, last night, he said, I had this situation before. I have big experience, but it doesn't help if you don't learn from your mistakes. He could feel the pressure. Okay, so here we go. Let's take a look at his last round game. He's playing black against Arjun Erigaisi. Erigaisi came out swinging because he went for bishop c4. Was it going to be a gioco piano? No. Erigaisi played the Evans Gambit. So this is a true 19th century opening. Named, of course, after Captain Evans, a sea captain who supposedly dreamt up this gambit when he was crossing in a packet steamer. That was his regular job, moving back and forth between Holyhead in Wales and Dublin. This was his idea, and it was one of the most popular openings in the 19th century. Okay, Andusattorov took it. Now, he didn't hang around. He played his moves very quickly, so it was quite clear that he'd anticipated this. And in fact, Andusattorov, if you look at the databases, he's actually played this as white himself. d6 and queen b3. Attacking f7. In these open games with e4, then f7 is often the weak point. And queen d7, again, played very quickly by Andusattorov. So he wasn't fazed by this at all. According to my database, this was first played in a game between Alapin and Levitt in the Berlin Championship in 1893. There we are. Yeah, this is more accurate than queen e7. And the reason is, okay, you protect the pawn on f7, but after this, there's a problem, because if the knight retreats, then queen a4 check picks up the bishop. That's the issue. But if you play queen d7, protects the f pawn, and if d5, the knight just goes back, and of course, there's no check on this diagonal, and if bishop b5, then just c6. So that's the reason that black plays this seemingly ugly move, defending the f-pawn, blocking in the bishop. That's not so pretty. But this is kind of the accepted way for black to play now. And knight d2, and knight a5 played. So yeah, if I look at my database, I've got 141 games with knight a5. This is the thing. You know, these old openings, very often, they've kind of been worked out. And if you can catch your opponent by surprise, then fine, they can be very effective. But Andusattorov has played in exactly the same way himself with white. Queen c2. So this bishop is knocked out. That's very nice. And then queen c6, and Andusattorov still moving quite quickly. So hitting the knight, and of course freeing the bishop for action. Knight takes, pawn takes, and d takes c5. So black is giving back the pawn, but it's meant that pieces have been exchanged, and actually black has a really healthy pawn structure in this line. White's pawn's not so pretty, they're split. And Andusattorov moved quite quickly, and I think that was a sign of nerves, actually. He has had this exact position before with white and faced queen a4, and this is the most reliable move. Well, it looks very logical. The queen comes to a very safe square, supported by the rook. The endgame, I would say, is already better for black because the rook is active, these pawns are weak. Black has very, very simple development. So the queen would have to move again, and then, I don't know, knight f6, knight e7 is also okay. Basically, black is just fine here. Black is about to castle. And structurally, black is better than white. I mean, if you put this into a computer, it says it's a roughly level position. But in the long term, I think black could well be better here. Even in the short term. But Andusattorov kind of rushed it. He played queen e6. And it's not such a pretty move because the bishop is blocked again. So Erigaisi, well, he is well known for being a very aggressive player, and he launched the f-pawn up the board. You don't have to play that. You could just retreat the knight and then play this position. It's less committal. You know, it might be that you play your bishop to f4, which looks at that slightly sensitive pawn on c7. But Erigaisi loves attacking. He's going for it. But there are pros and cons to playing a move like f4. One of the reasons that it's often a little bit frowned upon, advancing the f-pawn, is that the king is a little bit weaker. Of course, the big advantage is that if you can get that pawn duo rolling, then white is going to be looking really good. So knight f6, c4. So preparing to put the bishop on the long diagonal, opening it up. Queen e7, stepping back, so now the bishop can potentially enter the game, and also preempting f5. And sometimes this check could be very useful. Now, how does white go further? You know, really, if you had this knight out of the way and you could push these pawns immediately, then that would be wonderful, but it's not so easy. One could sacrifice a pawn, play like this, and potentially get some initiative there, but one feels that black ought to be okay with the rook there. Erigaisi chose a4. And some ways I quite like this because you might want to put your bishop here. Some positions you might be able to do the good old rook swing and play the rook up to a3 and swing it across to the king's side. That would be wonderful. But in the meantime, black is fighting back. So knight d7. Well, if black can exchange pieces, then, well, that is a wonderful position. That bishop is going to sit on c6. It's completely secure, looking at a weak pawn here, slicing through the middle of the board. Wonderful position for black. At least there is potential for black to get a serious advantage there. So knight f3. So this is the problem with white's position. If his initiative peters out, then Erigaisi is going to be struggling with these split pawns. f6. So blocking that bishop off, that's a very prudent move. Rook e1. So Erigaisi perhaps wants to advance. Knight to d5. And now is the crunch moment. What do you do with these pawns? Instinctively, I want to play f5 here to just restrict that bishop and then go for e5. But after this, in fact, it's not so troublesome. Got to keep hold of that pawn, and actually black is pretty comfortable there. And just to repeat, once that bishop reaches this long diagonal, then that is a beautiful piece. And look at the knight, wonderfully placed. So black's minor pieces are pretty good here. Erigaisi pushed with e5, but now we see the point of playing f6. Andusattorov closed the position with f5. If this were a blitz game, I would be very tempted just to play e6 here, just to open up the diagonal, open up the e-file. But actually, black can just take this and then just block with knight e4. Okay, that could perhaps be exchanged off, but I mean, black doesn't have any difficulties there at all. Knight d4 played. Okay, here is where I would like you to have a think. I am going to have a drink. So it is black to play. What did Andusattorov do next? This is a nice move. Black to play. See you after this.
I've seen many chessboards in my life, but when I heard about this one, I was keen to see it for myself. It's beautiful and completely wireless, thanks to an integrated battery and Bluetooth connection. For my edition, I wanted pieces that reflect clarity. When I play with them, everything feels natural. Just me, the board, and the game I love. This is my supreme chess set, the Daniel King edition.
Remember that patrons can receive a €100 discount on the Daniel King chess set. I'll put details on the Patreon site. Okay, back to this position. So, knight d4 just played, and it's very important that black blockades on e6, because if this pawn is allowed to advance, then that bishop suddenly sizzles down the diagonal, and that is potentially extremely dangerous. So how should black blockade? Well, if you play bishop e6, then it's always in range of the knight, and white could play bishop a3, put a bit of pressure there. So there's pressure on both pieces. Still probably okay for black, but I'd rather not be under that pressure. Andusattorov found a much better way, and that was knight e6. Excellent move. So if white were to exchange, then you can see that that pawn is securely blockaded. Bishop can't be touched. And that means that the rook and the bishop are really stymied. And then black can turn his attention to these weak pawns. Structurally, black is a lot better here. Okay, but what about knight takes f5? Well, that's what Andusattorov had to calculate. But actually, after knight f5, queen f7, black is absolutely fine. The knight is attacked. This pawn is attacked, so black is going to get the pawn back. Knight e3, knight takes f4. And again, we just look at these pawns. 3 isolated pawns. Black has 1 solid pawn island, can't really be attacked. And this should be good for black. So it's a question of whether white can sort of stir up a bit of trouble, try and complicate the issue before black really settles into this position. I mean, that's an attempt to do that, but I mean, it would be a mistake to take this, which opens up the c-file. Don't want to do that. But bishop e6, really solid move. So this is now a threat, just to take here. So, whoops. Let's get it right. Sorry, jumped ahead. Bishop e6. yeah, it's a problem. So white exchange, this is the game. And you can see that really Erigaisi's strategy with white has failed. He hasn't been able to open the long diagonal. The e-pawn is securely blockaded. Black's pieces are already active. All the pieces are active. And now Erigaisi is just left with these weak pawns. Rook d1. And this is interesting that Andusattorov doesn't go crazy. He just realizes, okay, I can play solidly here, even exchanging the pieces, because in fact the pure opposite colour bishop endgame is really promising for black, because both these pawns are on light squares. So let's see. Bishop c1. I mean, before then, white has to survive black's initiative, actually. It's not easy. Rook e4, queen e7. Okay, the queen is safe. I mean, you can see that nothing can touch black's position. I mean, it's a lovely position to play for Andusattorov. Remember, if he scores just a draw, then that'll put Sindarov in the position of needing to win the game. But basically, Andusattorov can push for a win without any risk whatsoever. That's a beautiful situation to find himself in. Rook e3, queen c5. There we go. The queen bounces out, looking at this pawn. And yeah, it's a nasty pin. Rook d4, so that rook is ready to take here. So bishop a3. Now, nice simplification here. Rook d1 check. So if queen takes, you can take here. And then take the bishop. Let's just see that. Check, and then queen takes, and the queen bounces back here. So king f2. Now this is just a way of exchanging rooks. And white still has a massive problem. In fact, the king is in big trouble here. It only needs a bishop to land on d3 or anywhere on this diagonal, and it's game over. Bishop b2, queen c5, bishop c4 check. So first pawn has dropped. And this is interesting. Andusattorov was really confident of winning this endgame. You know, there's a lot of nonsense talked about opposite colour bishop endgames. Although black is only a pawn up here, this is going to be winning because black is able to create connected pass pawns. Let's see how he did that. Well, first of all, e6. Okay, so basically this is just an exchange of pawns. And now Andusattorov can concentrate on the queen side. And b5, that's a crucial move. This couldn't be stopped. There's certainly no point in playing a5 because basically the king will dance around here. And that'll, well, you can push both pawns, but it means that pawn's vulnerable as well. So Erigaisi exchanged. And now it's just a case of advancing those pawns carefully so they don't get blockaded. So this would be an appalling mistake. This, because there'd be a blockade and that would just be a draw. But instead, what you do is you put your pawns on dart squares. There we go. King a4. Now there's a funny position actually because black threatens bishop d1 mate. So the king had to step back, and then you could play king b5, but bishop d3 is very careful. That just corrals the king. And actually Erigaisi had enough here. White resigned. Okay, let's just play the game out. So let's just see. So if king b2, king b5, and then c4, bishop e5, c3 check. And if king here, then, and again the pawn advances. There's nothing to be done here. And crucially, if white gives up the bishop, then this is a completely winning endgame. Black will be able to bring the king over, force the win of that pawn, and then this is a win because the bishop is on the right colour square to promote the pawn. So I'll leave you with that final position with those two pawns about to advance. Well, that was a very impressive victory by Nodirbek Andusattorov. You know, you could be fazed by something like the Evans Gambit, but actually he knew the antidote very well, so it wasn't an issue. Apart from actually a slight hiccup with this move. Queen a4 is the sort of approved move rather than queen e6. Nevertheless, he negotiated the complications very well indeed and completely outplayed Erigaisi actually. So that meant that Nodirbek Andusattorov won the tournament. He's finally done it. And what an impressive performance. Let's look at that final table. Andusattorov with 9 points. Now Sindarov actually won his game against Tai Van Nguyen. So he had to win that one. It's interesting. So Andusattorov 9, Sindarov 8.5. So the two Uzbeks way out ahead in the tournament. Very impressive. Sindarov only 20 years old. Andusattorov 21 years old. Quite incredible. And then Niemann, Keimer and Van Foreest on 7.5. They all drew their final games actually. Yeah, so many congratulations to Nodirbek Andusattorov. He's on a really rich vein of form at the moment, having won the London Chess Classic really convincingly, and now wins this Tata Steel tournament very convincingly. He said afterwards that this was the biggest achievement of his career, which is saying something, as he won the World Rapid Play Championship in he was 17 years old, so he would have been, it was in 2021. There we are. Fantastic performance. What about the candidates? So there were 4 candidates playing. We had Pragyanananda, we had Giri, we had Bluebaum, and we had Sindarov. Well, of course, Sindarov will be the happiest of them all. He showed great form, very solid, and he'll pick up a lot of confidence from that. The other players, I think, will kind of slightly shrug their shoulders and go, well, it wasn't the real thing. But I thought Matthias Bluebaum played pretty well to get 7. Giri will be very disappointed. I think that might knock his confidence a little bit, but okay, he'll just brush that under the carpet. And Pragyanananda, he looks really tired. He needs a rest. His schedule over the past year has been absolutely punishing, and I hope that he's able to get a proper rest before the candidates and is able to prepare properly, because he won't give a good account of himself otherwise. There you go. I hope you enjoyed my coverage of the Tata Steel Tournament 2026. I haven't even mentioned the challenges. There's a lot going on there. There's going to be loads coming up on the channel. Of course, the candidate starts at the end of March. Before then, well, I've got lots of things on the channel coming. I've got some author interviews. I'm going to be interviewing Sam Shankland very soon, so look out for that. And I will see you all very soon. Thanks for watching.